The fall run of cattle is upon us, and Clint Berry with Superior Livestock is back with us. As today we'll talk calf, yearling, and replacement markets, but we'll also have an extremely informative discussion on whether or not to wean calves.
You know, our data will show you that weaning year in and year out pays, but weaning's not always available for a producer. It's not always set up to where they can do that. Sometimes they're limited on forage or labor or all the above.
And we'll hear his thoughts on the most overvalued and the most undervalued animal in the market right now.
I think right now the most undervalued animal is.
To hear his response, listen in to this week's episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And this is the Working Ranch Radio Show, and I'm Justin Mills. Thanks for joining us here on our program today. This is episode 86, and before we get to talking about what's on our show here today, boy, I will tell you, one thing I am very thankful for is the weather change that we saw across many portions of the country, specifically kind of in the Pacific Northwest and Northern Tier. The smoke out of the fires that were west of us here in Wyoming was just absolutely crazy. I mean, we've had fires in Wyoming in the past that the smoke wasn't as bad as what we were getting here the last bit of last week, with some of those fires really getting going, and the wind in just such a way that it was actually blanketing quite a big part of the country across to Idaho and Montana, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Nebraska, and even down into Colorado as well. So glad to kind of see that moving on along. As we talk about weather change, as we always do, meteorologist Don Day will be joining us at the very end of our program to talk about what we're going to be seeing here in the next couple of weeks. Now, for our program today, we kind of have a regular joining us here. Mr. Clint Berry is going to be with us here today. He's a representative for Superior Livestock. Anytime we've had Clint on, I always like to visit with him about the markets, because he does have his finger on the pulse of the market out there with the volume of cattle that he works with and trades with and producers that he represents. And so I like to visit with him. And so as we get into this time of the year, we're going to be not only talking about the markets when it comes to calves and yearlings and some of these replacement cattle, but also we're going to have some discussion about weaning, because that's also something that in my head, I'm thinking, do I wean or not this year? Are we going to get the money back in that or not? And that's just that, to me, I think that's probably a dialogue that we look at every year, but some good discussion that Clint will share with us when it comes to weaning as well. Right now, though, let's take some time and thank our sponsors of the Working Ranch Radio Show, Gelbvieh and Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. For information, go to gelbvieh.org. Also, a thank you to Zoetis. Visit inheritprogress.com to request a call with a rep and ask about free TSUs to get you started. Those are subject to availability. Also, speaking of Zoetis, it's the little things that could derail progress, but your herd can be covered. Visit getlessparasites.com for solutions from Zoetis. The American Akaushi Association, experience the difference at akaushi.com. And Biozyme, it's weaning time. Yes, it is. So for protection and recovery, think VitaCharge by Biozyme. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-Charge. Well, it's time to check in, as we do each and every week, with the captain, Tim O'Byrne. He is the publisher and editor of Working Ranch Magazine. Let's check in with him now for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents.
Hey, Justin. Hey, all you fans of Justin's Working Ranch Radio Show out there. Justin, there's some really cool conferences going on in this industry. Here's one of them. It's coming up here actually on Thursday, September 15th in Muncie, Texas. The Caprock Beef Cattle Conference, presented by the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. And it's going to be at 9 a.m. at the Floyd County Friends Unity Center in Muncie. And the cost is $40, which also includes luncheon and a free cap. Wow. Actually, breakfast burritos will be provided at 8 a.m. Maybe me and you ought to sneak down there and take full advantage of free breakfast burritos. Now, here's the topics. Dangers of Johnson grass, prussic acid in hay and grazing by Rosalind Biggs, DVM, Oklahoma State University, Cooperative Extension Service beef cattle specialist in Stillwater. Early weaning, Justin Benavides, PhD, AgriLife Extension economist in Amarillo. Low-cost feed solutions and parasite control, Jason Smith, PhD, AgriLife Extension beef cattle specialist in Amarillo. Carbon credit information. Didn't you have a show about that a couple of episodes back? Kate Lewis, PhD, Texas A&M AgriLife Research soil chemistry and fertility specialist in Lubbock. And ultrasound demonstration by our good friend Tommy Perkins, PhD, associate professor of animal science, West Texas A&M University in Canyon, Texas. Justin, pick me up. We'll head on down there.
All right, Captain. Well, start packing your bags because I think we can be to Texas in no time at all. Now, folks, they talked about a show we'd done on carbon credits. That was last week. I encourage you to go back and listen to that. It's based off a webinar that the King Ranch Institute for Ranch Management put out there. Great program last week. Well, stay with us. When we come back, Clint Berry with Superior Livestock joins us as we talk everything from the cattle market to considerations on weaning. We'll be back after this.
Every year you pick your replacement heifers. Some become profitable cows. Others disappoint. How can you make more reliable selections? Genetic testing. Commercial cow-calf producers like you are using Inherit Select from Zoetis. You gain valuable predictions, including cow fertility, size and soundness, feed efficiency, growth and carcass merit, as well as easy-to-use economic indexes. This improves your selection, breeding, and marketing decisions. Request a call from InheritProgress.com and ask about free TSUs to get you started.
And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills as we head now into our featured interview here today. And joining us back, as he has before on the show when we start talking cattle markets, is Clint Berry. He's out of Fort Worth, Texas, but he's a representative for Superior Livestock. And Clint, thanks for joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
You're welcome, Justin. Glad to be able to join you all once again.
You bet. Well, as we look at this time of the year, I always like to get you back around here to visit with us a little bit because I know you work with a lot of producers out there. You represent an awful lot of cattle out there, and so it is the time of the year where we've seen some cattle already marketed to give us a little bit of a trend of where this market's going to be at. It seems to kind of dip down a little bit this time of the year, but it picks back up as we head into that fall run. So maybe quickly kind of looking back just a little bit. I don't want to dabble too much into that, but this calf market was pretty good on these early summer sales.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Probably even a little stronger than what would have been anticipated, back even in the spring discussions. We really started noticing it in the June sale when we fired off about mid-June with our first of the big summer runs, and we're actually sitting at our home base in Hudson Oaks, Texas, just outside of Fort Worth here today, selling on the Labor Day sale, kind of the last of our big summer runs. But throughout the summer, we've seen those, and yearling prices too. We've seen these cattle just trend in the upward position, and a lot of times, depending on the type of animal it is and the delivery windows and stuff, we've seen a lot of calves throughout the summer that have sold from 15 to 30% increase in value as compared to last year. It's certainly been a strong market, and it's been a very stable, steady market through the summer. Those prices have held strong, and once again, like I say, we're here in the middle part of September here, selling calves, and it's working that way right now too as well. And it's just been a really nice, refreshing taste to see optimism back in the cattle business.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen on all sides, buyers and sellers alike, just it's just a little breath of fresh air. It's kind of been shot into the market here over the course of the last month. I think everybody kind of sees that leverage due to supply issues as we move forward is trending toward the favor of the producer.
Mm-hmm. Whether
he be a cow-calf guy or a stalker or a feeder, or, the man owning the cattle is gaining the leverage due to our increased demand that we keep seeing for the beef, but yet on the decreased side of the cattle of it gives us that leverage back in that producer pocket, and that's dang sure going to be a nice shot in the arm.
Yeah, you bet. Let's step out maybe about 30,000 feet on this market, and from yourself, not only are you representing a lot of cattle, you see a lot of cattle across the country, and let's just take a look at this cattle market just at about a 30,000 foot level. And what are just some of the factors that you feel are giving the leverage back to the seller?
Well, once again, everybody in agriculture lives and dies by the raindrop. And, drought has been from a supply standpoint, drought has certainly played an impact over the course of, say, the last 18 months and continues to. Last year, most of our northern cattlemen were faced with one of the worst droughts they'd seen probably at least since 2012 kind of era. And a lot of cattle had to come early during that time period. A lot of cattle came light, and of course there was, hardly any heifer retention whatsoever, but the guys were culling deep into those cow herds. And that has trickled as we moved into 2022, that drought pattern, while they got relief in most of the northern area, that drought pattern simply shifted south. It stayed predominantly in the west, but it's moved into the central southern plains. And, in my travels in August, I noticed the impact of the drought probably as far north as severe, probably, north of, say, Cheyenne, Casper, Wyoming area, stretching plumb out into the desert, out going into California. And, there's places that were better than others and worse than others, but that drought pattern just laid over us for most of this spring and summer, and it really affected everything. And it started in the southern plains last fall because we were so short on wheat, bringing them cattle out, just kind of changed the placement of the cattle coming off early when they did have some wheat pasture to go to, but a lot of calves went right into the grow yard instead of going to pasture, and that changed the kill factor on how those head counts were coming out as we were processing too. But that, and I don't know that anybody has the exact numbers, but I think you could probably pretty conservatively say over the course of the last 18 months, we've probably killed about 750 to 1 million extra head of cattle that wouldn't have been harvested on a regular basis, which, starts to shift that dynamic on that supply side as we move into the upcoming years.
Well, and I'm sure, as we just talked about the seller's leverage in that, from your position, again, as a representative, that's the middleman between the seller and the buyer. From your perspective, the buyers, they've got to have some optimism in this market to be able to put some more value into these cattle. From the buyer's perspective, what are they feeling?
Yeah, and you're exactly right there, because they see it too. The way this works is the calves start to creep up in price, so the buyer's input costs go up. And we haven't even started talking about corn and fuel, but just from a standpoint of that. But they're all, you can see it if you take your seller's hat off and can pull your calculator out and run some break evens with comparable cost of gains and stuff, and you'll watch and see that these calves that are selling are not, they're not going to break even on the current market level on the live cattle board. There's a lot of these cattle that are $50 to $100 out. They're betting on the come on that side too, because they know we're going to be short of cattle, and they're betting on that live board creeping up. We've seen the feeder board get real aggressive, pushing into the 80s in a lot of places. 180s is what I mean by that. That live market, while the output on the long term looks pretty good, up into the mid and upper 50s at times. We really need about another $10 on that live board. And honestly, you can tell by the optimism out there that there's a lot of people that believe that's exactly what's going to happen. So you can see that gap coming. You can sense it, that, we're going to run into a time here that we're going to be short on fat cattle, cattle ready to harvest. And you're already seeing that in some places where we're just seasonally a little short on having, immediately ready to finish cattle out there.
Yeah. I'm not going to hold you to this, but because it's as good as anybody's guess. But as we're creeping this market up and we're seeing our cattle numbers, herd numbers, total herd numbers here in the country less than they've been in several years, it does give you an indication that this market's gonna be there for a bit. I mean, and again, you probably don't like to do this, but just on an outside, what do you think the run on this market? How many years is this going to be?
Well, and probably the best answer, I thought when we, if you look back historically, 11 and 12 drought, a lot of cattle dead. You look back at the big rally in 13 and 14 and how quickly we rolled from prices trending upward near the bottom of 12, dang sure at the start of 13, and they trended upward until we got into 15, and then basically, at least through the first quarter of 15, then we started dropping in those values. So that actually turned quicker than what I think anybody imagined.
Yeah.
But part of that was also due because of the thing that you've got to remember as you look back at those numbers. Part of that, there's similarities to what we're seeing right now, being short of cattle, having a lot of cull cows, a lot of cattle going to town because of the drought conditions on top of a declining cow herd number at that time. But don't forget that so historical was also perfect timing in the fact that poultry and hogs were also suffering at that time. They were short in supply too. So our protein competition was in short supply, not just the beef. And that made a difference in 13 and 14. That's not necessarily what we're looking at right now.
Sure.
We're focusing just in on the beef. But if you do the raw math, and from what I'm seeing right now, there's not much heifer retention going on out.
Yeah.
Customers are not retaining heifers. You don't see a lot of people developing bred heifers for replacement. You can smell that coming. And there's been a lot of conversations about that, where's that turn in that replacement female part, that bred stock female part, does that start this fall or not? And that's probably going to be most heavily dependent upon the moisture in areas. But if we just forget 2022 for right now and we start retaining heifers in 23, then they calve in 25, and that calf is in the weaning pen in the fall of 25. So as we start retaining heifers, that puts an even greater pull on that market because now we got less animals standing in the feed yard because we're keeping more heifers. So, I mean, it would be hard for me to see this without an outside factor that would limit us, like from our export markets or something like that. With the demand that we've built for beef as a product and the shortage we have on cattle, it would be hard for me to comprehend how we aren't going to be in an upward market like this for at least 2 to 4 years.
Sure.
And that might be, that might be 2 to 3 years, and that might be 4 to 8 years. It just depends on how part of that's going to play out.
Yeah.
But I see dang sure over the course of the next, round numbers, 2 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years, it'll be in our favor because of just the cycle of beef production and how we start to replenish those numbers.
You bet.
I think a nice other additive to that is, if we learned anything from COVID, we learned how critical our hook space is on the processing side. And so seeing a lot of these announced added regional or smaller mid-sized packers that are coming in, that's going to be a real boost to help with this too, because not only will we be ramping up some production on those cattle, but we're also going to be bringing in more chain space, which should translate to more, competitive bids on the live cattle side. And that's where it's got to come from. And so I think on top of all that, even as we start to rebuild that herd a little, we're going to have more hook space in the next 2 to 4 years as well, just from the announced plants. And that's a big benefit to producers. Yeah,
absolutely. That's going to be a major difference than probably from any time before in a way. So, folks, if you're just joining us, my guest today is Clint Berry. He's a representative for Superior Livestock. We're talking cattle markets here on our show this week. We've been kind of just laying some base work and some foundation of where we're at in the market right now, where we're at foundationally. When we come back, we're going to continue. I want to talk with Clint more about some of the types of cattle, values of some of those kinds of things, and where that could be headed towards in the future. We were talking about the lack of keeping of replacement heifers. We're going to talk more about that when we come back on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
At the American Akaushi Association, we're more than prime. The American Akaushi Association was created to help ranchers be more profitable and find opportunities when using Akaushi genetics in their herd. We focus on market opportunities for our members and offer support from conception to consumer. When you choose Akaushi, you have a network right there with you. Experience the difference at akaushi.com. That's AKAUSHI.com.
And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Today we are talking cattle markets, and joining me is Mr. Clint Berry. He's out of Fort Worth, Texas, but he's a representative for Superior Livestock. We've got some other shows here on the Working Ranch Radio Show where he has joined us to give us kind of the beat on where the cattle markets are at this time of the year. Everybody's we do have a good indication, as we were talking about in the first segment here. Clint, I want to touch, before we get into some other things you and I were talking about over the break here really quick, is a week or so ago I'd seen a news release coming out that you had referenced the increased capacity, hook space capacity out there, and I wanted to just kind of throw this out there. I had seen a news article coming out that Walmart was maybe going to invest in the one additional one being built in Nebraska, and boy, it makes you kind of wonder, are we going to see more of these grocery chains kind of getting involved in this, a little bit more vertical integration in this market?
Yeah, and you have to, at least my simple mind, rolls around to some common sense, economics here. And during COVID, issues with keeping enough on the shelves, for the first time in probably 2 generations, you'd walk into a grocery store, and not that they were empty, but you dang sure had limited supply, and that never makes a retailer very happy. And, I have to think that there's got to be a piece of us, especially some of those bigger companies that understood the how finite that was, and perhaps investing in some of them to streamline the fact that they're front in line on getting the product on their shelves first because they're part owners and something like that. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me that they would invest in something like that for their own benefit. Let's not make any mistake. I mean, it's not out of, not saying anything mean, but it's not out of the kindness of their heart. It's own self-interest in supplying, their inputs so that they can provide the business that they need to do to their customers. And so I can definitely see why somebody would step up and do that. And it's great to see, whether you like them or not, it's great to see somebody come back and invest in the supply chain, because that's been our biggest hindrance throughout the whole deal, and has been for decades, is that critical kill space capacity, because we can only fit so many through the chain at a time. And if we ever want to have more cattle, or if we ever want to have cattle worth more, even as we grow the beef demand, we've got to be able to get them processed in a timely manner and dead, so that we can force competition on that side. And that's what's so nice seeing this. I mean, you see these announcements in Texas and in Nebraska and in Missouri and South Dakota and Idaho of new plants coming online, or renovations, millions and millions of dollars being dumped into renovations on some older plants. And, all of that starts to add up and make a difference. And that's going to be critically important as we go forward. Don't get me wrong. One step, one plant, as a producer, you hear things like, this plant's going to kill 1,500 and that plant's going to kill 2,500. And individually alone, that's not really enough to change the parameter in the market cycle. If you realize that on average, the bigger plants kill 4,500 a day, well, it takes a lot to change that gap in a week's worth of kill. But when you start combining this, that's where it really starts to make a difference. And it can really make a difference regionally, because every one of them that they pull out that packer's still going to, the big packers are still going to have to keep their chains full to run efficiently, and they're going to pull cattle from other areas. So it's one of the, rising tide floats all boats kind of scenario. And that's what's really refreshing from a producer side.
Mm-hmm. At the first segment, we were talking about just purely some of the dynamics that have shaped the market where we see it here in the heading into the fall of 2022. One of the things you touched on was replacement heifer retention. So with that in mind, what do you anticipate this fall seeing on these heifer prices and or potential replacement heifers that are available?
And I think that is going to be predicated so much on moisture in parts of the country, because you have to understand when you're talking about replacement females, it can be extremely regional. Mm-hmm. If you start talking about a part of the country like, let's say, Montana, that killed a lot of extra cattle in 2021, have the moisture and feed to be able to bring some of them back, or cashing in on the calves they have this year with an up in price cycle, they may have a little stronger, that part of the country might end up having a little stronger replacement female market than say Texas is going to. It's going to be heavily dependent on that, because unlike feeder cattle, replacement animals can be extremely emotionally based when they're being bought. It's just they're figured differently, because you buy a bred heifer and you're planning on spreading her cost out over 10 years instead of over, 6 months as a feeder. So that varies. In the August sale, we had a good strong offering of some bred stock, bred heifers in particular is what I'm kind of talking about here. And I might be off a little bit, but roughly I think we offered 21, 22 lots of bred heifers. 2/3 of those traded, were sold. And, those heifers, if I remember, they ranged from like $1,650 to $2,200. And, and that sounds great and it sounds bad all in one time, but there's the kind of variance that we're talking about. You're talking about $600 spread there, which is almost a third of the value of the cattle. I think it's clear to see that there is some interest in those better ones. It's just, obviously also we're at a point, it's going to be so regionally based on the moisture content and the available forage, because even in north where they've got some moisture, they may not be ready after what they had to spend in hay to hold their cow herd together last year to really be in a place to start growing if it doesn't involve heifer retention. So it'll be neat to see what happens as we move into the fall. And historically, regardless of drought conditions, historically, as you move into the fall, the bred heifer market ramps up. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, that's generally because of a few common sense things. As you move into the fall, guys have started, they've probably cashed their calves in, or at least got them under contract. Farmers have got their crops in the bin, or at least have a better feeling of what their income is going to look like than they do, say, in the middle of the summer, even if you're selling heifers that are still delivering in the fall like we do. At the same time, you're starting to get into cases where people have started preg checking.
Yeah. Well, stay with us. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, Clint Berry with Superior Livestock is my guest today. We're going to continue with one more segment with him as we talk more specifically. We're going to dial in on this calf market as well as the yearling market as we anticipate and get ready for this fall run. We'll be back with more on the Working Ranch Radio Show after this. It's weaning time, one of the biggest days of the year for you and the most stressful for your calves. Ensure a smooth transition with the VitaCharge weaning program. This two-step program with the AmaFirm Advantage gives calves the nutritional boost they need to get through the first weeks of weaning, accelerate appetite, increase weight gain, and improve health. It's weaning time. Get them ready with VitaCharge. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-Charge. And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. My guest, if you're just joining us, Clint Berry, who's a representative for Superior Livestock. He lives in Fort Worth, Texas, represents cattle all across the country. And Clint, let's get now specifically into some of these markets. We've already seen a pretty good bunch of calves and yearlings sold for the year. We still got a fall run yet to go. And so let's dial down just a little bit on this calf market a bit, and kind of what are you seeing just in general in terms of, if we were to look at these calves from light weights, say 400 weights, all the way up to 6.5 weights. What's the dynamics of what you're seeing in this market?
And there's a big range in there. Yep. There's been a lot of high 80s, low 90s that would sell in those weight range, especially on that heavier end, like you said, 400 to 600. But I've seen them trend as high as in the upper 280s, 270s, 290s. Most of those are going to be third-party verified program cattle when they start to demand that kind of a price, and they're going to be on the lighter weight end of that. But consistently, we're selling a lot of $1.95 to $2.25 calves. And, you're still seeing the trends of the more bells and whistles you can offer as a seller to give your buyer options, the better off those cattle are going to compete. And same way on the weaning. If there's a lot of, we sell a lot of balling calves with, what we call VAC 34s with 2 rounds of modified lives, 2 rounds of Clostridials and a Pastorilla in them before they ever leave the ranch. And that's a great calf to get started. But you still have losses that are higher than in cattle that are weaned, and those weaned calves are still going to draw a demand, and they're still going to draw a premium, especially in the program cattle. Because, when you start talking about those programs, if they limit antibiotic use, like the natural programs, those calves that have to be treated that might have had a lower pull rate if they had at home for 45 or 60 days, they have to factor that risk in too on those balling calves. That doesn't make them not valuable. I'm just saying that weaning is, our data will show you that weaning year in and year out pays, but weaning's not always available for a producer. It's not always set up to where they can do that. Sometimes they're limited on forage or labor or all the above. So but you're seeing a lot of variance in there, and that's where that'll come in. But like I said, when we first started talking, consistently, we're seeing a lot of cattle trade for 15 to 30% more than what they did last year for the same class and quality. Yeah. And that's an encouraging factor, because the reality is our input costs are probably that much too.
Oh, sure.
Marginally wise, it always feels good when your calves bring more money. Marginally wise, I don't know if we're actually putting any more money in our pocket this year than we did last year, just because all of our input costs are higher. So if same way, whether you're a stalker or a feeder or a cow-calf guy, if we can help control some of these input costs, there's a real opportunity here. But right now, feed and fuel and fertilizer, the 3 Fs are really eating up that added income.
Well, and you kind of answered one of my questions I was going to ask you about the weaning thing. We'll maybe talk more about that in just a bit. As we look at these cattle, and I know that's a pretty big range to say 400 to 6.5 weights. So then the question on top of that would be, if we break that down, and we have guys maybe vacillating back and forth, do I wean, do I not? Do I try to put an extra 30 pounds on these calves over a 45-day wean if you can get that done, or so? They're looking at that. And so on these weights of calves, how does that break out? What are you seeing on these lighter calves versus the heavier calves, and the total dollars that we're seeing throughout that?
That's a complicated question, because it varies drastically. And the part that most sellers forget is, a lot of times you'll hear guys talk and they'll be selling calves, specifically like in our video system, where we're selling them today. Let's just say, for a round number, we're selling a 6-weight calf today. Sometimes that 6-weight calf is delivering next week, and sometimes that same 6-weight calf that's selling today is delivering in December. That is not the same animal. Sure. Even though they're both a 6-weight, that's not the same animal. Everything else is alike, because they're going to die at a different time. And if you look at the board and you understand, like when you look at the live cattle board, you see the different variances in dollar amounts projected right now in the different months, you start to understand how that month of delivery affects the month of harvest, and that affects what the total inputs or total income can be for the guy selling the cattle as fat cattle. And that gets really confusing. That noise, that static, can really affect those price ranges you see on those cattle. But in general, I think what you're really asking me there is, how do I figure as a producer what weaning is worth?
Yeah.
And the reality is, in my opinion, I'll tell you, just historically, every year, Merck Animal Health and Kansas State go through and evaluate our value-added programs, and they try to break them cattle out and be able to lay out what those what each of those programs are delivering or what each of those practices are delivering. In this case, we're talking about weaning, so that's not really a program, that's a practice. But in general, I mean, 20 years of data, weaning cattle will garner a premium over everything else being the same, somewhere in the $6 to $10 range. That's there's going to be years it's more. There's going to be years it may be just a little less. But I mean, I tell guys year in, year out, it's $8 or $10 a hundred. Mm-hmm. So on a 6-weight calf at $8, that's $48 a head. Now that may not sound like a lot to wean them, but then the other kicker plays in, and I tell guys this all the time. Part of the value in weaning is you put more pounds on the truck. I mean, that's part of it. If you're weaning calves and they're not gaining weight in your weaning period, then you don't need to wean calves because they should be gaining weight. Now, they're going to have a time there in the immediate part of that weaning process where they're going to lose some weight. We get it. That's stress and shrink, and they're changing their diets, and they haven't figured out how to eat and all that kind of stuff. And that's why it varies so much as to how successful guys are at weaning cattle, because we don't all do it the same. We don't all have the same facilities. You know, some of them pull them off a pasture and lock them in a dry lot and feed them everything they have. And that's a lot more stress on a calf than kicking them back out and fence line weaning them back into an environment they're used to. I mean, all those things play in. You've just got to figure out as a producer yourself if it's worth it. But it's not worth it, in my opinion, if you can't put weight on those calves. And that's why the other thing that I kind of scratch my head is when I hear guys tell me, well, them calves have been weaned 15 days or 20 days. And I'm like, why would you go to the burden of weaning them and taking on the risk of a health outbreak for 20 days when you don't have enough time to put weight on those cattle? You know, because they're not weaned at 20 days. They may not be balling anymore, but their rumen and the microbes in it haven't changed over to a diet without mother around. You know, there's still and from a vaccination standpoint, the titer levels to build immunization are not right, depending on when you gave those shots. I mean, there's a lot of factors that play into that. But I tell guys all the time, if you're going to wean them for 30, wean them for 45. The last 15 days will give you more weight gain than the first 30 did.
That's the bonus.
You know, right. And that's the bonus, because now you get a calf that should be weighing, you know, a pound to 2 pounds more per day weaned. Plus you're getting, you know, $8 or $10 a hundred over. Now weaning is worth it, but it's got to fit everybody's situation. Yeah,
that's a good point. And I think it's critical for us as producers to really know what our numbers are, know what our costs are, our daily costs to run those calves that we're going to be weaning on as well. So I think that's a good point. Yearling market real quick. As we look in the fall, of course, a lot of that yearling market's probably maybe already sold through, but we still got some late yearlings that'll probably be coming to the markets here. What's that looking like?
That's been really strong. And I attribute that to two factors, and at least in my mind. One is corn costs are, you know, I mean, we're pushing right now, we're pushing kind of cash trades on corn in the $7 range, and most contracts have a big fat 6 in front of them, not a little 6, but a big fat 6 in front of them. That doesn't look very appetizing when you start figuring cost of gains. So part of that is the fact that, you know, if I buy an 8-weight, I don't got to feed it near as long as I got to feed the 5-weight. I don't have near as much corn wrapped up into it, you know, especially if they're going, you know, basically straight to feed, let's say going into a grow yard or into a finish yard. The other side of it, I think, is a little bit about the unknown. You know, well, it's a little different risk factor when I'm picking up a 9-weight and feeding it because of the window between point of purchase to point of sale on the live cattle side, on the fat cattle side, you know, and I think that plays into it too. Plus, you start seeing these differences like what we were talking about earlier about having gaps where we don't quite have finished cattle to meet the supply and demand side of it. You know, there's some guys trying to guess that market right there. Where's the weak spot in my feed yard? What months am I short of projected finish weight cattle? Maybe that's something I want to acquire, because when my fat cattle buyer comes driving in my yard and I'm putting together my show list, I'd kind of like to have some ready to finish fat cattle in every month, you know, from a cash flow and revolving business standpoint. And I think there's some guys that are also doing that, you know, that know they're short this month and they can seasonally see that that's coming.
Yeah.
It's amazing. There's never a direct answer to your questions.
I know. Well, and here's my next question. I think this will have to be our final questions here. And I was thinking as I was thinking of these questions, that he's not ever going to come back on with me if I don't give him a list of questions here, because I've spring some of these questions on you. But here's two final questions I'm going to ask you. We don't have to dialogue a whole lot about them, but I think it's interesting here, and we'll see where you're at on this. And I'm going to ask you. First question is, at this point in time, and folks, keep in mind, this is a snapshot of today. So what do you think is the overvalued animal in the market?
No, I can tell you what I personally feel.
Okay.
And other people may disagree with me on this. Those 450 light 5-weight balling calves coming in the fall, right in the midst of changing seasonal patterns and weather, which is not uncommon. I mean, we all get that, but you move from it's hot all the time or it's cold all the time in the winter into a day. We all know this, that temperature swings can be 30 degrees in a 24-hour period. All right. That's hard on an animal already going through stress, but those balling calves that are bringing 220 to 250, 100.
Yeah.
You're talking about having an animal that is primed and perfectly ready to die that costs you $1,200 or $1,300. That is I'm happy to see it happen, but if you want to ask me where I would much rather give you $1,500 for a yearling than give you $1,250 for a balling calf. They have one round of shots.
Hey, you're kind of hitting my market here a little bit. I shouldn't ask that question a little bit. Okay, second question, final question here, real quick. What is the most undervalued animal in the market right now, in your opinion?
Oh, okay. So now this is you're about to see my optimism come out.
Okay.
The most undervalued animal right now is the replacement female.
Okay.
I mean the open heifer to develop as a replacement female, because in general we are still selling heifers, $10 to $20 back of steers. And I know every producer out there is going to hate me when I say this, but you know why we are selling them at that price? Because that's all they're worth.
Yeah.
Guys always look at their calves, regardless of sex, and think it's the same thing, because they all got vaccinated the same. They all ran in the pasture the same. They're all sired by the same bulls. But fellers, they're not the same animal. All right. They don't have the same rate of gains, and they dang sure don't have the same pay weights. That's where a lot of people miss it. Now you can get into some terminal based females that are different than this, but in general, across the same set of cows, steer and heifer mates, heifers are gonna cost more to feed for every pound they put on, and they're gonna die somewhere between 50 to 100 pounds less than their steer companions. So when I buy a 5-weight heifer, I may be lucky if she weighs 1250 or 13, and I buy a 5-weight steer, and I'm going to kill it at 1350 to 14 or something like that. Maybe it's 100 pounds plus or minus, depending on the animal, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that's why those cattle are discounted, which is exactly where they should be if it's in a feeder market. But when you sense the optimism that's coming and the decrease in cow herd that we have, I think right now that most undervalued animal is that top end sort of those replacement heifers that guys can't keep or aren't willing to keep right now, maybe, due to drought conditions or something, because I think in the short term, that's going to make the set of bred heifers that will take the spike and possibly be selling for $2,000 to $2,500 on a regular basis as top end replacement bred heifers.
All right.
Not saying the bottom end heifers, I'm saying the better end heifers.
You bet. Well, Clint, that you spot on there as far as a good way to end on our show here today. I sure appreciate you taking the time. I know you were in the middle of a sale, and I appreciate you stopping and taking the time to visit with us here today.
Most welcome, sir. I'm always glad to be a part and always have fun visiting with you.
And again, my guest today has been Mr. Clint Berry with Superior Livestock. He's a representative for them, and I always enjoy visiting with him because the volume of cattle that he handles and sees on an annual basis does give him a pretty good insight to our cattle market. And, of course, as a representative for Superior Livestock, another method there that does market an awful lot of cattle across this country. By the way, if you'd like to get a hold of Clint, his phone number is 417-844-1009. That's 417-844-1009. 778-44-1009 is his phone number. Give him a call if you have any questions on this as well. And, of course, you can also find his contact information on Superior Livestock's website, which is superiorlivestock.com. Well, stay with us. When we come back, meteorologist Don Day steps in as we take a look at our long-term weather, and we're seeing some weather changes coming across the country. We'll talk about it when we come back on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Every little thing is important to cattle producers, from daily chores to parasite control, just like protection is important to us. Based on approved labels, Valbicin suspension covers 25% more parasites and life stages than Safeguard. Visit GetLessParasites.com for more solutions from Zoetis. Consult your veterinarian for assistance in the diagnosis, treatment, and control of parasitism.
For commercial cow-calf producers, crossbreeding with Gelbvieh Balancer is the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. Gelbvieh Balancer females offer maternal superiority through increased fertility, greater longevity, and more pounds of calf wean per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer cattle can offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Gelbvieh Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. For more information, go to gelbvieh.org. And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Justin Mills here with you as we're joined now by meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. And can we honestly say, Don, fall is in the air? Can we look past these 100-degree days that we just recently had and say fall is in the air?
We certainly can. The pattern change that has developed here over the last few days, especially across the central and western parts of the United States, is really a signal that the summer season is coming to an end. Now, summer ending with a bang with all the record heat and dryness over a large part of the United States, the central and the west, here over the last 10 days or so. But this type of weather pattern change is enough to sort of disrupt the system and get us into a weather pattern as we get into the middle to the end of September now that is going to look a little bit, let's say, more typical for this time of year.
Yeah, well, and that'll be nice because I'll tell you what, it's one thing to have 100-degree wet heat in July and August. It's another thing when we're in September thinking we could be having snow at the same time.
Well, yeah, just a couple of years ago, we had snow in many areas of the western part of the United States and the northern Rockies just after or around Labor Day. So it happens. But also, if you go back and look in the records, you can find a lot of really hot first weeks of September. And folks have a very short memory. Yeah. There was a lot of the United States that was colder than normal for the month of May and for the first half, really the first 3 weeks of June. Temperatures in many areas were below average. So I guess having September have some summer weather really, I guess, should be expected since summer actually got off to a late start this year.
Yeah, it was kind of late. That's for sure. I guess I hadn't thought of it that way. Well, let's talk about here what we're going to see for the next couple of weeks. We do see some hurricanes, as you had told us before. We'd gotten through the entire month of August without any major any hurricanes, but now we do see some showing up, and that is some remnants of that are creating some moisture across the country.
Yeah, we're going to see something that have seen here recently, something we haven't seen in a while, and that is the remnants of a hurricane going into parts of the southwestern United States. The only way that can happen is if you get a hurricane that goes up the west coast of Mexico, and that's exactly what happened with Kay. Now, Kay has weakened, breaking up into pieces, but those pieces will bring significant rainfall to the deserts of Southern California, Los Angeles, San Diego, Las Vegas. Parts of Arizona could see some significant rain, and also importantly, cloudiness, and that rain going to cool off parts of California and Nevada that have had record-breaking heat as well, which has really strained the energy grid. So that's good news all the way around. This doesn't happen very often, but it's happened in the past, and it usually does happen in August or September.
And of course, as you said, the hurricanes out in the Gulf or out on the Atlantic, that has spurred up some moisture in the southern part of the country, south central part of the country as well.
Yeah, we are going to see wet weather continue, especially in the east and the southeast areas of the United States. Now, so far, we've avoided any major hurricane strikes along the east coast or the Gulf of Mexico, and I think we'll have that going on for a little bit longer. We had been in the last few weeks talking about all the wet weather in Texas. Well, they are going to see, at least for a little while, a drier weather pattern before I think the middle to the end of next week starts to bring rain chances back into many areas of the central and the western areas of the United States. And I do see some opportunities later this month for more strong cold fronts and more tastes of fall. So for those of you wanting some cooler weather, in some areas, you've already gotten it. And in other areas, well, it'll be coming soon.
Well, and I know last week we were dealing with a lot of smoke. And then when the cooler temperature came in, that kind of helped to move some of the smoke out. So I'm sure some moisture in the Pacific Northwest where they're seeing some fires in Oregon and Idaho and Montana is going to be helpful to kind of clear out our air because, man, it was getting bad enough to make your eyes water.
Yeah, and really the smoke this summer season in parts of the United States hasn't been nearly as bad as the last couple. But we've had a little bit of a late season surge here, and I do think this weather pattern change ultimately is going to help out with the smoke and for those folks trying to fight those wildfires as well.
You bet. All right. Well, Don, again, thanks for joining us here, giving us a look at our long-term weather here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Talk to you later.
And again, that was meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. His website can be found at dayweather.com. A couple things that you'll find on his website will be a link to his daily video podcast that he kicks out every Monday through Friday morning. But also, if you're needing a rain gauge or maybe a weather station of some sorts, you can go there too and find out what he's got on his website. Well, stay with us. When we come back, we're going to put a wrap on this week's show and talk a little bit about what I'm working on for future shows here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. We'll be back after this.
Do you have a young child, grandchild, niece, or nephew that loves the weather and wants to learn more? Day Weather has produced a children's weather journal full of weather facts, fun weather experiments, coloring pages, and pages to record weather observations for every season of the year. The weather journal is for ages 3 to 7 and designed to be fun and educational. The interactive weather projects are fun for the whole family to take part in. For only $10, the Day Weather Journal is a great gift idea for any occasion. Click on our Amazon link to order at dayweather.com.
Well, before we head out here today, a couple things. First of all, how many of you have had an opportunity to get through or partially get through your September-October issue of Working Ranch magazine? I'll tell you what. You know, in the past, I've talked about how so many of the articles and the things offered in Working Ranch magazine are so relevant to our ranching industry. And I don't know how they could do it, but this issue, I'm not sure, isn't one of the best I've seen as far as some very dynamic articles that just hit home to our industry. For example, we're all thinking about it, but there's an article in there on the replacement forecast for 2022. Also, how about retained ownership? Hey, that thought's gone through my head. There's an article in there about the pros and cons of retained ownership. And, of course, the Cattle Care Catalog is part of this edition as well, so full of stuff. And I don't want to forget to point out, too, Waddy Mitchell submitting a special tribute to Baxter Black, who we lost this past summer. So I encourage you to take a look at this latest issue of Working Ranch Magazine. And if you do not have a subscription to Working Ranch Magazine, if you go to workingranchmag.com, you can get your subscription started today. Also, speaking of the website, a new design has taken place for Working Ranch Magazine's website. Check that out. And by the way, are you following us on Instagram or Facebook? There's some great stuff coming out on Facebook and Instagram. Check it out, Working Ranch Magazine, on your social media. Now, here is what we are working on for future shows of the Working Ranch Radio Show. A while back, I talked about a book I was reading by Steve Cody, who's a low-stress cattle management expert, looking to put together a series of shows with him. I hope to bring that to you soon. Also, do you have questions about solar wells? Well, we're going to be doing a show on that as well. A quick thank you to our sponsors, Gelbvieh and Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. Also, Zoetis. Visit inheritprogress.com and request a call with a rep and ask about free TSUs. And speaking of Zoetis, it's the little things that could derail progress. Visit getlessparasites.com for solutions from Zoetis and the American Akaushi Association. And with weaning time right upon us, think VitaCharge by Biozyme. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you'd like to get a hold of me, please let me know. If you have an idea for a show or questions that you heard on the show, shoot me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll be right here, same time, same place next week. I'm your host, Justin Mills. And until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.